Hey guys, your captain is back.
Hi.
When I see channels that are primarily making SpongeBob content, I always see at least a couple of ranking videos. Season 1 episodes ranked from worst to best, every season ranked, the best modern episodes, the worst pre-movie episodes. I can give you a surprisingly high number of examples. That made me want to do a ranking like this too, because I love SpongeBob SquarePants. So for the next two SpongeBob videos, I'll do a cycle with the worst episodes and the best ones, and we're starting today with the 10 worst episodes of the show. Hope you all enjoy. Number 10, Ink Lemonade. Season 11 is easily one of the best seasons in the whole show.
What? How can you say anything after the first movie is good?
It's simple. Most episodes are creative, funny, have really good world building as well as character building, and the animation and graphic style both look so colorful and crisp. I'd even say season 11 is on par with the golden age of the show.
To be honest, I haven't watched the show since the first movie. I could easily tell it was going downhill since the final nanosecond of pranks a lot.
But of course, even the best seasons in the show will have a couple of thinkers, and for season 11, it's easily Ink Lemonade. This episode is literally a big compilation of what not to do in a SpongeBob episode. It reunites everything the fans hate. In this episode, Patrick runs a lemonade shop, but nobody wants to buy his drinks because what he's saying is actually water. He doesn't even have any lemons.
My teacher always told us when life doesn't give you lemons, sell water and pretend it's lemonade.
Squidward then comes to this lemonade shop to mock Patrick's stupidity. As early as in the start, this episode suffers a couple of problems that already make it a very tedious watch. First, the faces. Usually, I actually like creative and wacky faces in modern SpongeBob, but in the good episodes of this era, I don't consider it's overdone. Some of these faces make me laugh a lot, but in Ink Lemonade, the episode starts off with 30 seconds of visual white noise where Patrick is yelling very loudly and making wacky faces without 1 second just to breathe, with a really gross joke implying a bandage too. Most of the jokes just feel obnoxious or gross, and certainly not funny. And because of this, the first act of this episode drags on way too much. There is nothing that serves the plot and no funny jokes to make up for that, so it becomes really boring. It's also a headache to watch, as the characters just won't stop yelling in the first part, with the first 3 seconds exclusively consisting of Patrick yelling lemonade between those wacky faces. Lemonade! Lemonade for sale! But then, when Squidward is scared by SpongeBob, that makes him spit ink in the water glasses. A customer then approaches the lemonade shop. She drinks the ink and loves it, believing it's actual black lemonade. She then calls other Bikini Bottomites, inviting them over to try this black lemonade. They all finish it very quickly, so Patrick has to get more ink from Squidward. Because of this, for a big chunk of the episode, Patrick just torments Squidward and continuously scares him to make him spit more ink. Just with this, we get two more tropes that fans hate in SpongeBob: Jerky Patrick and Squidward torture. Patrick is a total prick who doesn't care about how Squidward feels. He is just bullying him for his own interests. In the good episodes, he's usually a charmingly naive and dumb guy who is still a kind person. But here, he actually sounds malicious rather than silly, even though we can see in some other episodes that he actually likes Squidward. Plankton would definitely do that for his chum business, or possibly Mr. Krabs if he can win money from that, but the well-written Patrick would not. Then, Squidward is constantly abused throughout the episode, even though he did nothing to deserve such a treatment. Patrick puts him in complete paranoia just because of the stupid black lemonade business. The worst is that Squidward, being a squid, he's likely going to suffer on the long term by losing all this ink, even though the torture is mostly psychological, since to get it, Patrick has to scare Squidward. And in the end, Patrick doesn't get any comeuppance for torturing Squidward, who can't even get a good revenge or at least something positive out of the entire ordeal. When the customers discovered that the black lemonade SpongeBob and Patrick were saying was just Squidward's ink, they just attack him so he suffers some more. Then SpongeBob and Patrick scare him again when they reveal they now made a business of cookies made out of spider eggs and show them the spider they used to make those pastries, which is the same spider that Patrick used to scare Squidward earlier.
Mildred, you've met Squidward.
He's horrified and he spits ink, but also a lot of spiders, ending the episode in a very gross way. And Lemonade reunites all the bad things in the worst episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. You have a lot of gross out humor that is not funny at all, Patrick is a prick who has no compassion for other people, and Squidward suffers for no valuable reason throughout the entire episode. It's understandable how many fans were afraid of a second Dark Age for the series upon watching this episode. Number 9. The Thing. As I already implied in the Ink Lemonade segment, Squidward suffering for no reason is probably the most infamous trope in SpongeBob. Almost all the fans hate this trope, and episodes involving it are almost always hated. Most of the fans have been debating on which is the worst Squidward torture episode in the show. For some of them, it's Choir Boys. For some others, it's Smooth Jazz and Bikini Bottom. And Ink Lemonade is also a contender for many fans. But for me, the worst Squidward torture episode is one that, surprisingly enough, is not hated by many fans. Nobody considers it as one of the best episodes in SpongeBob SquarePants, and actually few people consider it good, but I don't see a lot of people putting it in their top 10 least favorite episodes in the show. It's The Thing in Season 4. This is pure, unadulterated Squidward torture. He's suffering literally every second, and that's practically never funny. It's just unpleasant. Basically, in this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick constantly interrupt Squidward's quiet afternoon. They force him to leave his own house on his back just to get some peace and quiet. He ends up hitting a truck, which covers him in cement. It then solidifies, leaving Squidward mummified. For 6 days, he's lost, and he walks in jellyfish fields, tired and desperate.
My grandparents keep telling me that this is how they went to school.
After this, SpongeBob and Patrick find Squidward but do not recognize him. They believe he's an animal and an endangered species at that. Because of how bad Squidward smells after 5 days of walking randomly in nature, they call him Smelly. Then they take him to SpongeBob's house, and now things get even worse. Gary attacks Squidward as soon as he sees him. Patrick yeeshes him and takes him to his home without him being able to escape or at least consent at all. And then, just because Squidward gets angry, Patrick calls animal control to take him to his zoo. Here, he's locked behind bars and has to put up with the Bikini Bottomites finding him really ugly.
Mommy, what is that thing?
I don't know, but it's hideous, isn't it?
So what gave The Thing the award of worst Squidward torture episode? It's very simple. Here, Squidward is literally stuck in a state of constant torture. In other episodes, he could at least try to escape the suffering he's going through. Here, he's irregularly prevented from moving and he can't speak. As a result, he's completely helpless and unable to tell anyone that he's Squidward, or even that he's not a wild animal. He's forced to sit through this agony and put up with everything he did not do anything to deserve. And it's not until the final seconds of the episode that he finally gets a moment of happiness. SpongeBob and Patrick take Squidward to creatures that resemble what he's become, so they let him here, thinking that they have found Smelly's real family. Squidward's taken by these creatures to their lair, where he gets to see a live concert from Kelpie G, his favorite musician. That makes him happy, which causes him to break free from the cement. This ending is good, but that doesn't save the rest of the episode. The reason is simple. Everything else required for that build-up was really unpleasant to watch. Squidward had to put up with the constant agony of being taken to places he didn't want to be stuck in and abused without any way of being fed since he can't talk and his ability to move is also quite limited. As a result, I just had to sit through Squidward being constantly forced to endure more torture. It's one of the most unpleasant episodes in the whole show, and this no exit vibe makes this the worst Squidward torture episode, since it becomes straight up depressing. Number 8. Dumped. Speaking of depressing things, the next episode is from another category that gave us many shit episodes, the Downers. It's when they try to make some sad moments but handle it poorly. Episodes like Had You Seen the Snail or Texas are legitimately touching and handle the emotion really well. They have a good balance in humor as they don't totally abandon it, but it's still more laid back than in other episodes. A downer, on the other hand, would just make the situation feel overly desperate, and it really feels like the show's telling you, look, it's sad, it's very sad, cry about it, I want to see those tears. They can also be frustrating to watch because in most of these episodes, everything seems to be going against the heroes. And despite being in season 2, which is for me the best season of the entire show, Dumped is one of the worst downer episodes you can find out there. This episode is so bad, depressing, and frustrating that you'd honestly think it's from season 6 to 8 when hearing the plot. The start of the episode is cute, I'll admit. We have SpongeBob and his pet snail Gary playing together and laughing, then Patrick joins the fun, and the three friends have a great time together. But then, Gary starts sticking to Patrick and doesn't want to get away from him. SpongeBob decides to let them have a sleepover overnight, but then, the next day, when he tries to have Gary come back with him, his pet snail just ignores him. He tries his absolute best, but it seems like Gary doesn't want SpongeBob anymore. Patrick then becomes a jerk about it. He basically rubs the fact that Gary would spend time with him rather than SpongeBob in his friend's face, as if he isn't already depressed enough. SpongeBob tries to find a way to cope with it. He tries to adopt new pets. But even then, the episode just wants to make SpongeBob a punching bag. His first pet, Rex, runs away 20 seconds after being introduced. His second pet, Larry, gets really aggressive, prevents SpongeBob from sleeping in his own bed, keeps hissing at him, and also ends up running away. But the worst part of this episode hasn't come yet. Patrick comes to SpongeBob's house to do laundry with Gary. SpongeBob starts mumbling before bursting into tears. He's basically begging Gary to come back, insisting that he's nothing without his pet snail.
I'm a wreck without you!
But still, Gary stays with Patrick, who becomes even more of a dick. Instead of comforting SpongeBob and trying to get Gary play with him too, he just rubs salt into the wound by saying to SpongeBob that he had his chance and he failed, which is a big jerk move, especially when SpongeBob is feeling that miserable without Gary, unable to cope with this loss.
What do you think, Gary? Wanna be fun, Gary?
How pathetic.
Gary!
Even the ending is stupid. When Patrick is doing laundry, he puts his pants in a washing machine. Gary enters this washing machine for an unknown reason, and soon we understand why. Gary was just hanging out with Patrick because he wanted the cookie in his pocket. Gary comes back with SpongeBob, who is happy about it. Even this ending sucks because it just makes the entire episode and the build-up feel pointless and cruel. Gary abandoned SpongeBob for 2 days just so he could get a cookie. Dumped is just a depressing and mean-spirited episode. Patrick is a complete jerk. SpongeBob psychologically suffers for no reason. None of the jokes are really funny, and in the whole episode, especially the climax, the atmosphere and the plot is really depressing. Easily the worst episode in the classic era. Number 7. A Powerful Gary. A Pal for Gary is SpongeBob SquarePants' most hated episode of all time. In most top lists talking about the worst episodes of the show, it often comes in first place. I think it's an overhated episode, as there are still a handful of worse ones, but believe me, it's still very bad. In this episode, SpongeBob starts to feel insecure about the fact that when he goes to work, Gary has to spend the entire day alone since animals aren't allowed at the Krusty Krab, even though his pet snail is actually having a great time on his own. One night, he stumbles across a woman who sells cute fluffy pets. He decides to buy one he calls Puffy Fluffy, so Gary can have some company while SpongeBob's at work. But the woman warns him.
These creatures can be very unstable, especially around other pets.
However, since SpongeBob didn't listen to her warnings, he brings the pet home.
Cinematic references. You never get us down. Am I right, Fez?
When SpongeBob introduces Puffy Fluffy and Gary to each other, things seem to be going well. Puffy Fluffy looks rather cute and calm. However, Gary looks and sounds scared, and the snail is right to feel uneasy. When SpongeBob isn't there, Puffy Fluffy starts to hiss at Gary and to be aggressive. And each time SpongeBob looks at them, the creature will pretend to get along with Gary well. Here's the main problem with this episode. SpongeBob is just so stupid here. He can clearly see that Gary is scared, shivering, or even panicking, but he does not do anything about it and thinks Gary is the one hurting Puffy Fluffy. And even if it could be excused at first, it goes way too far in the climax of this episode, because Puffy Fluffy is literally and clearly trying to eat Gary. Yet, SpongeBob is still blaming his pet snail.
You put Fluffy down right now! Bad boy Gary! Bad! Bad!
How can he not see that his pet snail is clearly in danger? How can he still think that Gary is the one attacking Puffy Fluffy and not the opposite? The worst is that when Gary ends up saving his owner's life, SpongeBob is still blaming him and seeing Puffy Fluffy as the good guy in this story, the good pet. He literally tries to follow the monster, so he returns with Gary. He's just being as stupid as Patrick in this episode.
Fluffy! Fluffy, wait! Well, Gary, what do you have to say for yourself?
Gary literally saved SpongeBob's life while his owner could clearly comprehend that he almost died and then that Puffy Fluffy was eating him, yet SpongeBob is too stupid to realize that Puffy Fluffy was dangerous. Also, the episode has too much filler. When SpongeBob buys Puffy Fluffy from the old woman, the first act's already over, so it means that 1/3 of the episode is nothing but just filler, without any joke that could be good enough to balance this. A Pal for Gary is just a complete butchering of SpongeBob's personality, just for a shameless parody of the cinema classic Gremlins. Number 6. Waiting. To be honest, talking about this one is surprisingly hard because this is as bad as a clip show episode. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the reason this episode exists at all is that the writers couldn't find a way to make Rise and Shine long enough to be Fungus Among Us' sister episode, so they had to shoehorn in a third episode that's only half as long as the other ones. No, really, I genuinely believe they weren't even trying with this one. The summary for the plot of Waiting can fit on a fucking breadcrumb. SpongeBob is eating cereal and discovers that the brand he chose offers a free toy to the people who send a coupon that is present in 99 of the boxes in the mail. So once he sends his coupon, he starts waiting for his free toy near his mailbox. And that's about the sum of this episode. I'm not kidding. They made an episode where the plot is just SpongeBob waiting for a toy, nothing more. We just watch him not finding any way to pass the time, not wanting to go to the Krusty Krab because he's afraid of missing his free toy, getting hungry, and Patrick also joining him. Yet really nothing happens here, and to make things worse, SpongeBob is very out of character. When his friends want to spend time with him, he just rejects them. He doesn't even want to do karate with Sandy and doesn't even spend 1 freaking minute to feed Gary.
Oh, Gary, not now. Can't you see that I'm waiting for the mailman? Doesn't anyone understand this?
In the end, SpongeBob and Patrick finally get their free toy, and after some laughs and a drawn out dance, they activate it, and since they didn't know it was a springy toy, they think they broke it, so they start crying together again, and then Squidward explains the toy is supposed to act like this, so SpongeBob and Patrick are happy that their toy is okay. Honestly, this is such a nothing episode. With the other ones in this top hit, I can at least feel something, even if it's mostly just frustration and disgust. But with waiting, I'm just so bored I could fall asleep. It really feels like this episode was written because the SpongeBob creators couldn't make something more ambitious due to time or budget constraints. At least I hope so, because I don't see any other reason to make such a cheap episode. Moving on. Number 5. Summer Job. After 2 Squidward torture episodes, here we have a Mrs. Puff torture episode. In average, these episodes aren't as bad as Squidward torture episodes, but when they're bad, it's not good.
Thank you, Captain Obvious.
And the worst of these episodes is literally worse than any Squidward torture episode. In Summer Job, Mrs. Puff is preparing to go home, excited for the summer holidays. But SpongeBob wants to give her a note, and he's constantly chasing her so she can read it. First, Mrs. Puff is kinda rude to SpongeBob, because since the note is on a paper, she could just spend 10 more seconds with him to read that note. But that doesn't make SpongeBob more likable, because he's just a pure stalker here. He just won't understand that Mrs. Puff wants to go home and is constantly following her in a way that just ends up becoming creepy. And because of this, Mrs. Puff ends up crashing in the Krusty Krab. She's afraid that the cops will give her life imprisonment because she has crashed before and had to face other jail sentences. So Mr. Krabs decides to blackmail her. He promises that he won't tell anybody as long as she keeps working at the Krusty Krab for free. Yes, this is literally slave labor under blackmail.
And she'll be working unpaid until he returns, won't she?
And even though Mrs. Puff destroyed a part of the Krusty Krab facade, she doesn't deserve to be treated like this. This is a very frustrating episode to watch for a simple reason. When Mrs. Puff expresses any negative emotions about her situations, Mr. Krabs reminds her that he will reveal the secret if she isn't diligent at work. Why would anyone want to see a character they love and who didn't do anything wrong to be forced on the blackmail without even earning money from it? It's even worse when you consider the fact that Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff are canonically in love with each other, which is proven by episodes like Krusty Love, Feral Friends, or Buff for Puff. So Krabs also comes across as a misogynistic jerk by blackmailing his own girlfriend. The ending's also crap. Mrs. Puff ends up being fed up with the non-existent respect she's receiving from SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, so she decides to leave, which is understandable. But when she goes in her boat, she ends up tearing SpongeBob's note and dropping it on the ground. The police notice her, and she gets thrown in jail for 7 years for littering.
What the heck? Mrs. Puff gets the same punishment for littering as Plankton for turning the whole city into slaves in the first movie.
Since that would mean 7 years without SpongeBob, she doesn't oppose any resistance to the idea of going to jail, and is even enthusiastic about it.
Time by myself in the Stony Lonesome is just what I need.
That makes her happy until she discovers that she gets driving classes the whole time. And guess who will teach her? Yes, it's SpongeBob. How is this guy allowed to be a driving teacher when he can't even get his driving license after dozens of failed attempts? Mrs. Puff desperately tries to escape, but to no avail, and the episode ends like this. Summer Job is a very frustrating episode to watch. Mr. Krabs comes across as a complete jerk as he not only manipulates someone to work as a slave under blackmail by threatening them, but he's doing it to his girlfriend of all people. SpongeBob is also annoying because he keeps repeating everything Mrs. Puff teaches him at boarding school, even though she probably knows those things better than him. Plus, once again, the second act drags on like crazy, making it really boring to watch and making the episode feel really short. A boring, frustrating, and unfunny mess of an episode. Number 4. To Love a Patty. Now we're kicking it up a notch. The last 4 episodes are so bad that I wonder how they even got greenlit it to be aired on a family-friendly channel. To Love a Patty is probably one of the most disturbing episodes you can find in the entirety of SpongeBob SquarePants, and not even in a good way. I really think the writers were drunk while writing the plot for this episode. I don't even want to summarize this one. SpongeBob literally falls in love with a Krabby Patty. Okay, moving on. Number 3 is...
Rayburn, I thought you wanted to make your videos as complete as they can be.
Okay, you heard me right. SpongeBob literally falls in love with a Krabby Patty. Not in a metaphorical way like an artist who's very proud of his work would do. No, literally. I'm not kidding.
I won't let you do this to Patty! Your beauty must be preserved! Amazing!
He gives it a name, prevents customers from eating it, let it cook crepes, compliments it, goes out on a date with this Krabby Patty. I think all of this speaks for itself, and when he's with it, SpongeBob just sounds completely crazy, as if he keeps seeing Patty as a real person.
Just waiting for her to put on her makeup. You know how long it takes a Krabby Patty to get ready.
Then, he's also completely out of character, as when Sandy and Patrick come to his house to play with him, SpongeBob just ditches them. Then comes the most disturbing part of the episode, the song I Can't Keep My Eyes Off of You. In this song, SpongeBob sings about his love for Patty, about how it's so beautiful, how their love is stronger than anything else, how he would do anything for this Krabby Patty. Yes, despite it being catchy, this is already very disturbing if you know the context. But the worst part of this song comes when clams want to eat Patty, and he just kills all of them. He usually loves other nautical creatures until wanting to live among jellyfish in the overrated nature pens. So why would he brutally kill all those clams? This just makes this song and this part feel even more disturbing and even disgusting. And it's not over yet. Patty slowly starts to rot as SpongeBob celebrates their 6-hour anniversary with a picnic. Yes, it's bad, but hold on now. Originally, this scene was supposed to feature SpongeBob in bed with Patty in a suggestive joke, which is even worse considering that the episode just implied that SpongeBob was having sex with the Krabby Patty. But thank Neptune, the scene was cut and replaced with the picnic scene we can see in the final version of this episode, because there is no way someone had the idea to do this bad scene in a family-friendly show without being drunk. Then, SpongeBob decides to take Patty on a romantic date at the Krusty Krab. The burger is rotten, and because of this, we get loads of really gross-out close-ups of Patty. SpongeBob ends up coming back to his senses thanks to Mr. Krabs and eats Patty. The episode ends like this. I don't think I need to explain why it's so horrible. SpongeBob genuinely sounds like a complete psychopath here. The concept was weird enough, but they kicked it up a notch by having SpongeBob ditch his friends, kill clams, and not serve their dish to the Krusty Krab customers just for Krabby Patty. Talk about disturbing. Number 3. Dalmatian Doofus. Next is an episode that feels like something you'd find in the Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon. And if you know this show, you probably understand that it's anything but a compliment. I really feel like the writers forgot what SpongeBob was. It's a show that takes pride in being mature enough, but still wholesome and family friendly to appeal to children and adults without having to look down to the younger audience or to turn edgy for every audience to like it. Demolition Doofus fumbles this philosophy by feeling like a fanfiction an editing would write, which shares the cost of derailing most of the characters and making the general plot very disturbing. In this episode, SpongeBob fails his driving test. His driving teacher, Mrs. Puff, is taken to the hospital, but this time the doctor has some very bad news for her. Because of the crash, she won't be able to puff again. And since she's a pufferfish, this is like a permanent handicap for her. This is already really bad, but things go downhill from there. SpongeBob is already unlikable. He doesn't realize how serious Mrs. Puff's condition is. I already said it. This is like a permanent handicap for her, which is something difficult to deal with a lot of people, and sometimes can be something that means having to give up on your passions or projects you were putting all your heart into. But SpongeBob doesn't care about this, and when Mrs. Puff learns the sad news, he immediately makes a pun, which is disrespectful.
From now on, I guess we'll have to call you Mrs. Pop.
He then forces her to go with him for a stroll, and even though this comes from a good intention, making Mrs. Puff happier, taking her to a stroll without her consent is also really jerky. Sometimes, when a person is suffering a serious disease, a painful injury, or is mourning a loss, they'd rather want to be alone with their thoughts and feelings for a while, until they feel better. And in these times, it's better to just leave them alone, especially since they'll probably feel overwhelmed by negative emotion they'd rather want to cope with in a serene atmosphere. But SpongeBob doesn't acknowledge this, so for the time being, Mrs. Puff is the victim in this story. But this is about to change very quickly. When she overhears people talking about the demolition derby during her stroll, she has a horrible idea. She signs SpongeBob for this demolition derby so he'll die in a painful way. You heard me right. She literally plans to kill SpongeBob, and she's overjoyed just thinking about the moment he'll die. This is downright cruel, especially coming from her. Why would she kill one of her students just because of a car crash? Usually, she cares for other people's safety. For example, in Girls' Night Out, when the prank she set for SpongeBob goes right, she immediately goes with Karen and Sandy to save her student. In Hall Monitor, when she gives the role of Hall Monitor to SpongeBob, she immediately regrets her decision because she's afraid this will affect other people in Bikini Bottom.
What are the consequences of what I've just done?
And things are not gonna go uphill. The demolition derby scene has some fun ideas, with SpongeBob beating his opponents in varied and creative ways, but sadly, it's held back by the fact that this scene drags on for way too long, and this ends up becoming repetitive because of this, especially since Mrs. Puff keeps seething, groaning, and yelling with anger like a psychopath when she sees that despite the strength of the opponents, SpongeBob is still alive and is currently winning the demolition derby.
Why are you still alive?
Then, even worse, she ends up being overwhelmed with frustration when SpongeBob still wins. She decides to use her own car to fight SpongeBob and kill him, and even worse, she totally admits that she wants to murder him, which just makes her sound even more crazy.
If you want someone demolished, I guess you have to demolish them yourself.
She keeps acting crazy and laughing maniacally, which is very out of character for her once again. The ending is also crap. At the end, Mrs. Puff inflates miraculously, and she's back to normal. That means Mrs. Puff just tried to kill SpongeBob for nothing, which makes all the ordeal even worse. And then, the episode just ends. Usually, when the other episodes, the ending was a bit developed. The writers made scenes that were at least 30 seconds long to find a proper way to cap off the episode without it feeling like a brutal cut. Here, it just stops. Like, I almost feel like the writers just gave up at this point, as if they didn't want to write a true ending and just made the demolition derby scene drag on to make up for this. And honestly, I understand them. Like, at this point, how do you make an episode with such a psychopathic premise end in a satisfying way? Demolition Doofus is a total train wreck that tries to be edgy and ends up just derailing every character's personalities while just being constantly disturbing. How this plot was actually greenlit by Nickelodeon while something like Midlife Crustacean gets banned is beyond me. Number 2, Stuck in the Ringer. Ugh. Stuck in the Ringer is one of the biggest downers in American cartoon history. It butchers the personality of SpongeBob characters and it reunites so many bad tropes from jerky characters to torture. This time, we start the episode with SpongeBob taking his daily shower. In the process of washing himself, he unintentionally makes the bar of soap he was using fall on the ground. He doesn't mind and continues showering with a spare bar. But then, when he's done, he ends up sleeping on the bar of soap that fell on the ground, and as a result, he gets stuck in the ringer he always uses to dry himself after his showers. Hence the title of the episode. Fortunately, or should I say, unfortunately, Patrick comes into SpongeBob's bathroom right after, so SpongeBob asks his best friend to help him. Unfortunately, he actually does the complete opposite. He uses glue and puts it on the ringer, leaving SpongeBob stuck forever.
Gee, thanks, Patrick. Now I'm stuck forever.
Patrick first tries to be supportive towards SpongeBob and to encourage him to go to the Krusty Krab anyway, but things go downhill from here. Again, at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob can't do anything. He mistakenly shoots mustard on Squidward's eyes while trying to put it on a Krabby Patty. He destroys the cash register, which gets the customers steal all of Mr. Krabs' money and ends up causing a total mess in the restaurant. SpongeBob ends up having to leave. Patrick then tries to take him to an ice cream shop to get his mind off of this, but SpongeBob can't even eat ice cream properly because of the ringer. Then they go to a carnival, and while Patrick's having a lot of fun, SpongeBob's having a miserable time. Yep, Patrick's a big jerk in this episode. He's actually only doing all those things to have fun himself. He doesn't even consider that SpongeBob might not be in the mood for going to the carnival now, or that going on the rides might be dangerous for him because of the ringer. And then, SpongeBob does the right thing, and in an era where he's usually pretty spineless, he finally decides to have a backbone and snaps at Patrick for ruining his life.
Maybe now you know how I feel about you ruining my life!
Patrick goes away, but then the Bikini Bottomites decide to be jerks to SpongeBob. Instead of being compassionate towards him, they just decide that SpongeBob was the one being mean to Patrick and blame him for everything, while saying that he deserved to be stuck in a ring. Don't they realize that because of Patrick, he harmed many of his body parts with even a bruised eye? Don't they realize how much of a living hell this ringer might be if SpongeBob basically loses the possibility to use his arms?
I mean, coming from the Bikini Bottomites, does this really surprise you?
I guess not, now that you say it, but even for their standards, it's a total jerk move. We then cut to the next day. After the carnival fiasco, Patrick decides that he doesn't want to be SpongeBob's friend anymore. We then get 1 minute and 20 seconds with absolutely nothing that serves the plot. Patrick is now just trying to have fun without SpongeBob and plays games that he can play alone, like having a staring contest against nobody or playing fetch by himself. And none of the jokes are funny, which makes this part drag on when this episode, like most other SpongeBob episodes, is 11 minutes long. As a result, this part is boring and it overstays its welcome. Then comes the depressing part. Patrick enters SpongeBob's house to see how he's doing, and SpongeBob has become the stereotype of a depressed person. He has grown a beard, is watching TV all day, and is not even leaving his chair. Here's the title that follows.
What you watching?
My favorite show. Oh, I love that part!
It just sounds like I'm supposed to see a hidden, morbid second sense about suicide in this joke, and once again, this just sounds edgy, unoriginal and certainly not fun, not even mature. Fortunately, Patrick manages to get SpongeBob out of the ringer by crying on the glue. Still, this was downer, wasn't it? I don't know if we needed the episode to be so depressing in order to get to this happy end. The ending could have been wholesome because though they get stuck again while hugging, and don't mind because they're together, Patrick has to ruin it with an unnecessary and dumb commentary.
Should I get the glue?
Stuck in the ringer reunites all the bad tropes with SpongeBob SquarePants. Patrick is a complete jerk and way too dumb, even for his standards. SpongeBob suffers throughout the whole episode for no reason, whether it's from Patrick, the ringer, or the Bikini Bottomite. Some scenes drag on way too much and become boring, especially the part where Patrick tries to play by himself. This episode is a complete disaster, and this time there is not even any part that can be considered a saving grace without a bot being here to ruin it. And yet, there is still one episode that might be even worse, and if you know SpongeBob well, you might have guessed which one it is. And without a doubt, the worst SpongeBob SquarePants episode ever is One Course Meal. Yes, despite A Powerful Gary being the most unpopular episode of the show, One Course Meal always comes as a close second. And for me, this is the absolute worst episode in all of SpongeBob SquarePants. The plot is literally offensive this time, as it fails in joking about serious subjects, so if you're sensitive to topics like suicide or self-harm, I recommend you to leave the video. In One Course Meal, Plankton attacks the Krusty Krab to steal its secret formula, as always. But as he's about to succeed, Mr. Krabs' daughter, Pearl, yes she's a whale, enters the kitchen. We then discover that Plankton's afraid of whales. He panics and begs Mr. Krabs to call her off. He ends up escaping the restaurant. But then Mr. Krabs has an evil idea. He's gonna disguise himself as Pearl to scare Plankton. If he only decided to do this when Plankton approached the Krusty Krab to prevent him from stealing the formula, it would be fine, a bit like he does in Plankton's army. But no, Krabs decides to go to the chum bucket to scare Plankton everywhere he goes and torment him with his terrible fear of whales.
I want plankton meat! Holy Brutus!
Why would he do this? Why would anyone do this? Why would anyone make a prank or a joke where the humor is just laughing at other people's misery?
Rigaboom, I gotta remind you that these memes exist.
Yes, I know these memes exist, but I never say they didn't suck. I know Plankton and Krabs are worst enemies, but I gotta remind you that this is still pure, unadulterated bullying. Not only that, but it was revealed 2 seasons before this episode that Mr. Krabs and Plankton used to be besties when they were young. So the fact that Krabs would do such a thing to his former best friend is just sad and even disgusting, even from him. Karen is also a jerk in this episode. When Plankton comes back from the Krusty Krab, the first thing she does is immediately roasts him, even though she usually cares about him, and would see that he looks scared. But here, she totally ignores the fact that her husband is legitimately tormented by Krabs. He ends up having to live with this trauma and nobody to comfort him for 16 fucking days. He doesn't even want to leave his own room and ends up having nightmares. It's legitimately disturbing to watch him sinking in despair and torments because of Krabs. And the worst part of this episode hasn't even come yet. After the nightmare, he realizes something. He's inevitably going to get tortured for his whole life by Mr. Krabs, whom he still thinks is Pearl. When he realizes this, he decides to unalive himself. I'm not kidding. He lays down on the road, waiting for a bus to roll on him so it will kill him.
What's the point of going on? I'll just be tortured for the rest of my life by that whale. That's it, I'm done. The 4:15 bus should be along any time now.
Suicide jokes or jokes about any other serious subject are not inherently offensive. I'd even say there is a way of writing a joke about these kinds of serious subjects that can make them hilarious if you're good at writing comedy. A good example is the suicide booth joke from the very first episode of Futurama. It works for several reasons. First, it serves for the depiction of an absurdist future. Then, it's realistic because in this world, people don't choose their careers. And thirdly, it's a critique of how people would rather ask, can we do it, rather than should we do it when using technology. And finally, it also serves for Fry and Bender's character development. One course meal is just joking about suicide to joke about suicide, which is not funny. It treats the ordeal in a serious way, but with relatively low stakes and a comedic atmosphere. And that's not even the worst thing with the scene. When SpongeBob tells Krabs that he's going too far, Krabs is laughing as he learns that Plankton is about to unalive himself. Then SpongeBob bribes Plankton in stealing formula again, which gives him more hope when he learns Krabs' secret fear. He tries to trap him, but SpongeBob betrays Plankton by fooling him with fake whales to make him hide in a hole so SpongeBob can bury him in this hole, ending the episode. Yep, Plankton loses in the end. Generally, in a show like SpongeBob, you'd expect the heroes to win and the villains to lose, which is logical, and Plankton is usually a villain. You see what makes this episode even worse now. Krabs, the man who tormented Plankton, bullied him, tried to ruin his life, made him paranoid, and pushed him to try to unalive himself, is apparently supposed to be the character we see as the good guy. But Plankton didn't do anything to deserve such a fate. Krabs just wanted to bully his enemy as hard as he could to get rid of him. How are we supposed to see Krabs as the good guy after everything he did in this whole episode? May I tell you, this episode was originally going to be called Plankton Got Served. Yes, this is what inspired the creepypasta. So this really feels like the writers wanted to tell us that Plankton got his just desserts, even though he's clearly the victim here. There is no way any empathetic person could see the one pushing his former best friend to unalive himself as the good guy here. One course meal is, and will probably always be, the worst SpongeBob episode ever made, and it's gonna be hard to top it. Very hard. But I think it's always worth mentioning, these episodes, despite being memorable by how bad they can be, are still a minority in SpongeBob SquarePants. While they might have turned some people away from the show, most of the time they get forgotten quickly, as they should, especially since the modern seasons of SpongeBob are generally well liked, at least seasons 11 and 12, even if the latest ones are a bit more divisive, and we instead remember the amazing gems that these TV show brought us, like SB129, Pizza Delivery, Christmas Hoot, Frankendoodle, Chocolate with Nuts, Pancakes, Idiot Box, Have You Seen the Snail, Roller Cowards, The Two Faces of Squidward, Not Normal, Goodbye Krabby Patty, Poet and Board, Girls Night Out, My Leg, SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, or even The Goop Father. There are so many amazing, creative, and insightful episodes in the show that there is simply no reason for the bad episodes to be what we remember first when we think of SpongeBob. And since I also want to show how incredible SpongeBob can be, I'll also make a ranking of the best SpongeBob episodes in the future. But for now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.
Bye bye.